There is a ceasefire in Lebanon, signed, declared, announced to the world by the President of the United States. And under that ceasefire, right now, today, entire neighborhoods are being leveled. Not before the ceasefire, not during the fighting, after it was declared. Satellite images don't lie. Videos geolocated to the ground don't lie. And the mayor of one of the most targeted towns in southern Lebanon has now given a number: around 1,500 residential buildings. Gone. Demolished. During a truce. So the question you have to ask is this: what exactly is being agreed to? And who, if anyone, is being protected? The ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon came into effect on April 16, 2026. It was brokered under American pressure, announced by President Donald Trump, and welcomed by much of the international community as a pause, possibly the beginning of something more permanent. But since that date, satellite imagery analyzed by NBC News, geolocated videos circulating on social media, and on-the-ground reporting from Lebanon tells a very different story about what ceasefire means in practice. Israeli forces have continued operating inside what Israel describes as a security zone, stretching roughly 6 miles into southern Lebanon. Within that zone, entire towns and villages have been systematically demolished, not just damaged, but flattened. Whole blocks, multiple neighborhoods, schools, mosques, residential homes. The Lebanese Health Ministry reports that more than 2,700 people have been killed since the wider war began in March. More than 1 million people were displaced at the height of the bombing, and the ceasefire deal itself is set to expire in just days, on May 17th. What you're about to hear is not speculation. It is documented, it is satellite verified, and it is happening right now. If you follow international news and want fast, fact-based coverage without the noise, subscribe, because this story is about to accelerate rapidly. Let's go back to the beginning, because context matters here. The current conflict didn't begin with Lebanon. It began in late February, when Israeli and U.S. forces struck Iran, killing its supreme leader. Tehran-backed Hezbollah, the Lebanese armed group with deep roots in the country's south, responded by launching strikes on northern Israel, starting around March 2nd. What followed consumed the region. For months, Israeli airstrikes hammered Hezbollah positions across Lebanon's south. Towns along the border were bombarded. Hezbollah fired back. By the time President Trump announced a ceasefire, over 1 million Lebanese civilians had fled their homes, most from the south. Then came April 16th, the truce. And this is where it gets complicated. Under the terms of the ceasefire, Israel retained the right, explicitly, according to the U.S. State Department, to take all necessary measures in self-defense at any time against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made clear from day one that Israeli forces would remain inside what he called an expanded security zone, stretching into southern Lebanese territory, stating this was necessary to prevent Hezbollah from threatening communities in northern Israel. But what has happened inside that zone since April 16th goes beyond security positioning. Satellite images captured by Airbus, the European aeronautics and space company, show the before and after with stark clarity. Images taken 2 days before the ceasefire was announced showed significant damage in Bint Jbeil, one of the main towns in the south. Images captured just 11 days later, on April 25th, show a dramatically larger portion of that town reduced to rubble. A video published online on April 18th, 2 days after the ceasefire, shows buildings across Bint Jbeil collapsing into enormous clouds of dust in what appear to be sweeping controlled demolitions. This is not random destruction from stray artillery. This is organized. Lebanese National News Agency reporting from April 19th confirmed that Israeli forces had continued destroying remaining homes in the town. The mayor of Bint Jbeil, Mohammed Bazi, told NBC News directly, "The really sweeping destruction kicked off after the ceasefire was declared." He puts the number of completely demolished residential buildings at around 1,500, along with schools and mosques. Israel wants to erase our identity and heritage so people are unable to come back, Bazi said. The IDF, responding to his comments, said on May 7th that its activities in towns like Bint Jbeil were directed solely against specific Hezbollah military infrastructure, not against the area as a whole, and that forces were responding to identified military threats. But independent conflict monitoring data tells a broader story. Armed Conflict Location and Event Data, ACLED, a U.S.-based independent organization that tracks conflicts in real time, reports that since April 17th, at least 120 towns and villages across Lebanon have been struck at least once by IDF drones, missiles, or artillery. Of those, 23 have been hit more than 5 times. At least 10 towns show extensive damage to multiple neighborhoods, buildings, and roads. And that figure only counts damage caused by airstrikes, drone attacks, and explosive devices. Ground operations are separate. The town of Qiyam, northeast of Bint Jbeil, has been heavily shelled. So has Maizal Jabal. Even Jebchit, more than 30 miles north of the border area, has been bombed during the ceasefire period. In the Christian border town of Jbeil, a video posted April 24th shows a bulldozer destroying solar panels. A separate photograph showed a soldier apparently taking an axe to a statue of Jesus. Netanyahu and the Israeli military condemned that latter incident. The IDF said it was not in line with its values and that disciplinary measures had been taken. By May 12th, the day before this report, Israel struck the Lebanese city of Sidon, killing 2 emergency workers. On May 13th, the IDF announced it had killed a senior Hezbollah commander in a Beirut suburb. The ceasefire has not stopped the dying. 2 expert analysts, one a former senior Pentagon advisor, one affiliated with a London-based security institute, have independently reached the same conclusion. The ceasefire is only a ceasefire in name. Their words, not ours. So what does that actually mean for the people living beneath it? To understand why what's happening in southern Lebanon carries implications far beyond its borders, you need to understand what's at stake, diplomatically, strategically, and politically. Start with the diplomatic timeline, because it's almost absurdly tight. The current ceasefire deal expires on May 17th, 4 days from now. The United States is expected to mediate a fresh round of talks between Israel and Lebanon on May 14th and 15th. But as of reporting, it is not confirmed who will participate or whether those talks will even go ahead. The State Department, when contacted by NBC News, declined to comment on Israeli operations in southern Lebanon and simply referred reporters to a statement about the expected talks. That silence is notable. Hezbollah has not been party to negotiations at all. The group has vowed to act in defense of Lebanon and its people in response to what it describes as ceasefire violations and aggression against civilians. The Lebanese government, for its part, has moved to ban Hezbollah's military activities, but has made little visible progress on the broader disarmament commitments it made in 2024 as part of the UN-brokered framework to end earlier fighting. Boulal Saab, a senior managing director who formerly served as a senior advisor at the Pentagon under the first Trump administration and now works with UAE-based Trends Research and Advisory, described Israel as using the terms of the truce to systematically dismantle towns and villages and other facilities, including mosques and schools, in the south near the border. Sites Israel assesses could be used by Hezbollah for military purposes. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz went further in his public framing. He has described plans to apply what he called a Gaza model to southern Lebanon, comparing Israeli military tactics there to approaches used in parts of Gaza that remain under Israeli control. Katz has also warned that residents of southern Lebanon will not be able to return to their homes until the safety of communities in northern Israel is guaranteed. Do you think this situation escalates once the ceasefire formally expires? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This is one of those stories where what the audience thinks genuinely matters. The strategic logic Israel is operating under, as explained by Kobi Michael, a senior researcher at Tel Aviv's Institute for National Security Studies who previously served as Deputy Director General and head of the Palestinian desk at Israel's Strategic Affairs Ministry, centers on Bint Jbeil specifically. The town carries enormous symbolic weight. In 2000, then Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah delivered a famous victory speech there as Israel ended 18 years of occupation. Nasrallah was killed by Israel in 2024. Now, the IDF has shared aerial imagery of what appears to be the stadium where he spoke, debris strewn and destroyed. Social media images from April 22nd show what appear to be Israeli soldiers placing an Israeli flag in the demolished facility. Michael acknowledged the strategic logic of targeting Bint Jbeil, but he also said that humiliation was part of the game, noting the town's symbolic importance to Hezbollah. He agreed with Saab. Practically, on the ground, there is no ceasefire. The geopolitical tension this creates is layered. The Trump administration brokered this deal and has staked diplomatic credibility on it. But as Berku Ozgelik, a senior research fellow at the Royal United Services Institute in London, observed, pressure from Washington is likely the only reason the arrangement hasn't completely collapsed. She noted that the fact that both sides are officially not withdrawing from the ceasefire means there is incentive to keep the talks going, at least for now. Whether that holds past May 17th is, at this moment, genuinely unknown. Here's the detail that hasn't received nearly enough attention. Hezbollah is not simply a militant group. It is a political party. It runs social services. It has parliamentary representation. It is embedded into Lebanese civil society in ways that make a clean separation between Hezbollah infrastructure and civilian infrastructure almost impossible to define from the outside. When an analyst says Israel is destroying everything related to life, those were the words of Abbas Awada, the mayor of Qiyam, the question that follows is whether the declared military rationale and the observed outcome on the ground are truly the same thing, or whether the destruction of homes, schools, solar panels, and mosques constitutes something more structural than tactical. That is not a question this report can answer. But it is the question that everyone involved in the May 14-15 talks will be sitting with. Consider what it means to return home to find it gone. More than 1 million people were internally displaced from southern Lebanon when the widespread Israeli bombing campaign began after March. That is not an abstraction. That is 1 million human beings, families, elderly people, children, who packed what they could carry and fled north, to Beirut, to relatives in other towns, to wherever they could find a floor to sleep on. The ceasefire, when it came in mid-April, felt like an opening. Many people started going back. Not cautiously, not reluctantly. They went back because their homes were there. Their lives were there. Their towns were where they were from. What they found was not what they left. Abbas Awada, the mayor of Qiyam, told NBC News that the destruction in parts of southern Lebanon became systematic after the ceasefire took effect. His choice of word is precise: systematic. Not random shelling, not collateral damage from active military engagements. Systematic removal of what he described as everything related to life. Think about what that includes. It includes the house your grandfather built, the school where your children went, the mosque where you prayed every Friday, the market where you bought groceries, the road into your neighborhood. All of it. Mohammed Bazi, the mayor of Bint Jbeil, gave NBC News a figure. Around 1,500 residential buildings completely demolished since the ceasefire began. Not since the war began, since the ceasefire began. Add to that an unspecified number of schools and mosques. Israel wants to erase our identity and heritage, so people are unable to come back, Bazi said. Whether that constitutes a deliberate policy or a military operation that produces that effect as a consequence is precisely the kind of question international courts and monitoring bodies spend years trying to answer. What is documented right now is the physical reality. Whole blocks gone. Whole neighborhoods turned to rubble. Video geolocated by NBC News to the region shows ash-coated trees, blazes still raging in fire-blackened buildings, dark smoke against open sky, the kinds of images that take seconds to view and represent years of someone else's ordinary life. In Jbeil, a Christian border town, not a Hezbollah stronghold, a bulldozer destroyed solar panels that families had installed, likely to cope with Lebanon's notoriously unreliable electricity supply. A separate image showed a soldier apparently using an axe on a statue of Jesus. The Israeli military condemned that incident specifically, calling it inconsistent with its values and stating that disciplinary measures were taken. But the solar panels were not addressed in the same way. The IDF said the damage was not in line with its values and that disciplinary action had followed. No further detail was provided. The Lebanese Health Ministry's numbers are sobering. More than 2,700 people killed since the wider war began in March 2026. That figure encompasses both the period of active heavy bombing and the ceasefire period that followed. At least 21 people have died in Israel since the wider war began, and the funerals keep happening. On May 12th, the day before NBC News published this report, 2 emergency workers, people who run toward danger to pull others out of it, were killed in Israeli airstrikes in Sidon, a Lebanese city. Their funerals were held the same day. The Lebanese citizens who have not yet returned to the south face an impossible calculation. Go back to uncertain danger and find out what remains of your home, or stay displaced, with no job, no school for your children, no end date in sight. Many who went back in mid-April and found their houses reduced to foundations are now displaced again, with even less to return to. One of the central questions embedded in the ceasefire's expiration and in the talks scheduled for May 14th and 15th is what happens to the hundreds of thousands of people Israel's defense minister has indicated cannot go home until northern Israel's security is guaranteed. What does that guarantee look like? Who decides when it has been met? Nobody has publicly answered that. The human clock on this situation does not run on diplomatic timelines. 4 days. That's how long the current ceasefire framework has left before it formally expires on May 17th. If talks on May 14th and 15th collapse, or don't happen at all, there is no current arrangement holding this together, and Hezbollah has already made clear it reserves the right to act. If talks produce a new agreement, the question is whether either side will observe it any differently than the current one has been observed. And sitting in the background is a bigger calculation. With Iran weakened, its supreme leader killed in February, and Hezbollah significantly degraded after more than a year of Israeli strikes, does this moment represent a window to reshape southern Lebanon's security landscape permanently? Or does it plant the seeds of the next round of conflict by pushing tens of thousands of Lebanese out of communities they can no longer return to? The answer to that question may be forming right now, in bulldozed neighborhoods, on the floors of displacement shelters, and in whatever room the diplomats walk into next week. Pull back from the satellite images, pull back from the specific town names and casualty numbers and diplomatic timelines. What you are watching unfold in southern Lebanon in May 2026 is a fundamental question about what post-conflict arrangements actually mean, and who has the power to define them. The ceasefire framework was negotiated with specific terms. Israel retained the right to self-defense. Hezbollah was excluded from direct talks. Lebanon's government made commitments about disarming the group. The United States agreed to mediate. All of this was announced, documented, and structured. And yet, as documented through satellite imagery, conflict monitoring data, geolocated video, and direct testimony from Lebanese mayors, what has occurred on the ground since April 16th does not align with what most people understand a ceasefire to mean. Bilal Saab, the former Pentagon advisor, used the phrase, "only a ceasefire in name." Kobi Michael, the Israeli security researcher, said, "Practically on the ground, there is no ceasefire." These are not Lebanese officials or Hezbollah spokespeople. These are analysts with established track records in Western security policy circles. That convergence of assessment matters. It means the gap between the formal agreement and the operational reality is not just a talking point. It is the consensus of informed observers across different institutional frameworks. The Israeli government's position is coherent on its own terms. Hezbollah remains dangerous. Its infrastructure in southern Lebanon was used to strike northern Israel. The security zone is intended to prevent that from recurring. The IDF has maintained consistently that its operations target military infrastructure, not civilian life. Netanyahu's government argues that Lebanese civilians cannot safely return until Israeli communities in the north are genuinely safe. But here's the strategic tension that no announcement resolves: the destruction of a town's residential buildings, schools, and places of worship, even if justified on security grounds, shapes what that town's future looks like. If people cannot return, if the physical fabric of their community is gone, if the stated condition for return is indefinite, then what has actually been achieved is not a ceasefire. It is a demographic and physical restructuring of the borderland. Regional observers are watching this carefully. What precedent does it set for other contested borders? How do governments in the Arab world, already navigating enormous public pressure over the conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon, manage their relationship with Washington if the U.S. brokered ceasefire continues to function primarily as a framework for continued operations? And then there is the question of time. Hezbollah, despite being significantly degraded, is not destroyed. It is embedded in Lebanese society, politically and socially. The Lebanese government has formally banned the group's military activities, but has made limited visible progress on disarmament. The conditions for reconstitution, grievance, displacement, loss, foreign backing from whatever remains of Iran's regional influence network are arguably being created in real time. Intelligence agencies monitoring the situation are not simply watching the current destruction. They are modeling what southern Lebanon looks like in 2 years, in 5. What returns to fill the vacuum when the IDF eventually pulls back? if it does. What political currents are being fed by images of demolished mosques and bulldozed neighborhoods circulating on social media across the Arab world? The talks on May 14th and 15th are not just a ceasefire extension negotiation. They are a test of whether diplomatic frameworks retain meaning when one party continues significant military operations under their umbrella. The ceasefire expires on May 17th. Nobody has said clearly what comes after. Southern Lebanon is not a frozen conflict right now. It is an active one, wearing the paperwork of a truce. And the next 72 hours, with talks scheduled, a deadline approaching, and a ground situation that multiple analysts say bears no resemblance to what a ceasefire is supposed to look like, could pull this in directions that would be very difficult to walk back. What do you think happens when the ceasefire formally expires? Does a new deal hold? Does this escalate? Does the international community actually apply pressure? Or does the May 17th deadline pass with little more than a statement? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to follow this story as it develops, especially heading into what could be a critical 48 hours of diplomacy, subscribe. Updates are coming.